In the CIA psychological torture simulator, disguised as the game Civilization 6, the average time it takes to endure a turn 10 incursion, turn 100 relapse, before the Mormons evolve their proselytizing techniques, approximates 250 turns. And in this episode of Civ Lifer's masochistic adventure, I'm not only going to be flaking on all of human history, but also proceed to beat the most arduous victory in the game, to withstand this Guantanamo certified torture program, and potentially leave with some of my nipples untwisted. I'll be employing the services of Little Zan, who makes this challenge viable, and terrorizes any opportunistic predators through Schedule 1 drug melodies. But that still leaves the question, how do I overcome the flooding that occurs when your girl finds you to be a Civ Lifer subscriber without flood barriers? Will I be able to emerge victorious despite selecting the North Sentinel Island start date? Smash that like button and sit back as you watch me get my coochie cum stirred for your entertainment. The impetus for selecting Coupe was the information he keeps tucked away in his face tats, and like Michael Schofield, will eventually be studied to unearth every building, improvement, and cultural tradition we require to make up for Coupe's cataclysmic drawback. His representation of the trees means that districts will provide less than a black father after cigarette stockpiles reach depletion. And while that would ordinarily be acceptable, the flooding caused by civilizations who've realized domestication is superior to engaging in Russian roulette with wild plant life will leave us but a meager amount of workable tiles, which is why it's imperative we improvise for our lack of quality by handing out free Second Amendments along with pamphlets arguing for the perks of native reservations. Starting with our capital on turn 250, immediately obtaining an advantage to production from forests due to Coupe's ability to sleep with the trees, and alongside their already high starting food that left me more erect than Nazis at a Hitler speech, will allow my capital to repopulate native ghost towns enough to pilfer all these high-performance tiles. But only if we fix the crippling housing situation. Thankfully, our starting poachers are able to construct fishing boats that not only serve as snug animal skins for the unhoused, but more importantly, commit a litany of animal rights abuses in the name of in-demand luxury goods, as my eyes light up at the thought of setting our scam in motion. By selling our morally questionable gains for an overvalued price, while their luxuries that flood the market are then bought for pennies on the dollar, we not only come out with a sizable profit, but also utilize the fentanyl-laced Adderall to supersize productivity in the form of a 20% boost to yields like production to synthesize more settlers, and more importantly, science and culture to obtain harbors in classical republic in under 5 turns. This social development fills me with hope by not only granting us more housing for more population, but also by legalizing apartheid for a 50% boost to building settlers. But on our way to classical republic, we had to pass by foreign trade, which was intentional, as the free trader was used to bribe Auckland into ignoring human and animal rights abuses alike, which combined with Amani assuring them of our commitment to democracy in matters not concerning a threat to our rule, granted us suzerainty of the city-state. And the suzerain ability for Auckland gives access to new poaching techniques for +1 production to further convince ethnic Maui that the lethal dysentery rate of 50% is just a number. More importantly, I realized the unforeseen consequences of making such an advanced city-state my vassal. They provided us a staggering 3 oil per turn, a consumable resource that every democracy will ignore brutal minority suppression to obtain. This lifeline changes our plans dramatically, as we could now buy settlers outright with gold. But don't be fooled. With the scaling cost of settlers when news of mounting casualties inevitably reaches the capital, gold is only a supporting resource. And if we truly want the vast utopia we so desire, with subsidized Clio sex bots for all, we will have to get creative with our production, creating a Sharks Corporation for another 30% boost to settlers, alongside the 50% boost from our new ancestral hall, and the best ability I could have ever asked Ares for in this challenge: temporary suspension of labor laws in every new city for the first 5 charges, not 3, who will obtain more resources for our rentier economy and double as megatiles to work, after our Pantheon, God of the Sea, grants another production to all sea resources. For those of you at home not keeping count, we now have a 150% boost to our insanely high production tiles when building settlers, who are now popped out in less than 2 turns. As a result of our ingenious plans and colonial colonial propaganda, our empire was investigated by the World Health Organization because of how fast it was spreading. This is great. Let's get everyone into libraries and universities Alright, I'm taking your boat and giving it to MacArthur. No, wait. When do we nuke the Chinese? But having all these cities doesn't automatically guarantee a productive society, as our yields are pitiful and the turns continue to tick away. In order to make up the distance to achieve yet untold miracles through science and match BBCs with Big Daddy Shaka, we need to develop these cities considerably faster than usual to allow enough time to teach Floyd Mayweather Cat in the Hat to a sufficient degree. And this requires 3 key yields: food, production, and gold. And the way we will accomplish this task is by settling on the ideal Civ 6 location. Locations ripe with plentiful jungle that have me bricked up harder than an 18th century chimney, and a coast where we can construct harbors that not only satisfy our gold needs, but provide an extra trader from the lighthouse. However, instead of being sent to further lobby Auckland's corrupt democracy, they will instead be sent to meet basic human needs on expeditions to the capital, obtaining the dino nuggies and Yedwiga body pillows that make up the base of Maslow's pyramid, leaving my starting serf free to focus on obtaining more tradable resources. Due to this cycle of astronomical development on previously native lands, our capital is now free to pursue its own needs, like building the mausoleum for science on the coast. While only a minor advantage, it does top out our science until we can get our population out of Section 8 and into schools. To aid in that task, we lock in campus production costs under unfair contracts that don't account for inflation. Before we focus on the district we need to complete second, industrial zones whose liberal usage of crack and even more liberal labor regulations give enough production to finish our now bankrupt library buildings, before being seized by the state for our own needs as scientific progress begins to slowly inch ever higher. This production also gave our primary cities nothing to build until universities, before soon enough even our secondary cities had nothing to build because of all the Saudi oil money we were making. Money we used to buy lighthouses, markets, and traders in between each Bugatti and Instagram toilet model instead of building them outright, leaving all our cities available to complete the final piece of the puzzle, constructing the building that gives huge food and production bonuses to coastal cities, the shipyard. Though I may have overdone it with the food, as our newfound diabetes skill tree rapidly deteriorated our standard of living, and with my monopoly on the insulin industry I fought tooth and nail to uphold, staying at +3 amenities was a gargantuan challenge, let alone +5, hitting our science numbers harder than Floyd if this video was ever brought to his attention. But was necessary, as we would easily make that up now that our cities were all fully developed and ready to wink their assholes at any competitor to our win condition. Well, most people were. With time continuing to slowly evade our grasp, our goal is to race to the end of the tech tree and leave enough turns to where we can begin engaging in our ambitious plans. And to do that, we have to take our drugged up empire and reap all the science we can. To perform that task, we first prioritize the modernization of our civic code with a new government and the same corrupt officials. The empowering of the affluent not only upholds triple-digit costs for insulin shots, but the extra slots are necessary to maintain our corrupt policies in addition to natural philosophy. But more than that, the advanced administration increases our envoy generation that we subsequently use in Bologna to improve science gains from Cat in the Hat institutions, which promptly makes an appearance. As we use our previously built-up golden production to complete construction in record time, skyrocketing not only our science numbers and filletable shafts, but also securing our trump card for this game. Thanks to our appalling early game, seizing a golden age was like taking virginity from a hooker. And with it being the information era, there was no chance this trump card could ever be shot down. Therefore, our game may have just been saved with a free giant death robot. The issue is a single robot, like our labor salaries, are insufficient. And to obtain more, we first need to make use of the industrial era buildings by bringing power to our cities. and tentacle hentai to our citizens. And through that industrialization process, with production inflating large enough to equate to your mother, the stage is set for research labs when we unlock them, until our ability to test radioactive shampoo on primates makes like the rest of our fauna and becomes endangered, all thanks to the catastrophic flooding submerging multiple campuses, leaving both the groundbreaking research of the effects non-Civ Lifer subscribers have on the hose, and all science buildings we erected prior nullified. Normally the solution would be flood barriers, but our attempts to fend off late-stage abortion this game meant that technology was out of our grasp. We make up for some of that lost science through an alliance with the Mayans, but the issue of her magnitude potentially catching us in her orbit requires immediate addressing, and without Guitarja and the 2 planets she bore on her torso, Sweden would have to do as our balancing grace. With her Earth satellite launched, once the level 2 military alliance was established, we can discover the rest of the map, as finally everything we were working towards this chapter makes its appearance. This is boosted through not only industrialized power, allowing lobotomy by electroshock therapy, but also by the 6 envoys we now have in Bologna where future lobotomites could be sourced. And after repeating what got us universities in record time, a few turns later, our people went from eating Tide Pods and buying Crypto Zoo to learning Obama's last name and unearthing the secrets of Yakub right on cue as the game was beginning to consummate. Still though, the main question has yet to be answered. How do we accumulate score? Wonders are already taken, civics and techs are too far behind for us to catch up, great people already gone, and finally empire, the amount of cities and population inhabiting one's realm, and the only method still available to us. And so it was time to mobilize our industry and science absolutely, as I look over at the Zulu's insane score with envy in my eyes, on top of my giant death robot. You see, I was going to purchase carriers and Saddam begons to do the job of annihilating foreign minorities, but we lack a key resource. With aluminum being a rarer commodity than Madeline Stillwell's breast milk, I would have to whip out the wallet and spend my V-Bucks on new settlers to obtain these resources. But then I began to ponder. This late into the game, with mobile SAMs and GDRs as common as child predators on YouTube, is an Air Force really going to be effective against an army with 400 turns of nipple twisting and belly button fingering under their belts? In my fear at that realization, I determined the only way we can defeat such a well-trained and disciplined force is if we build a GDR army of our own. He's dead. And the problem with that is GDRs run on the rarest resource in the game. And aside from one source in our vicinity, the only other claimable deposits are in the poles where loyalty would pose an issue. Therefore, our only choice is to take it off Cyrus, the closest neighbor hoarding his 2 deposits and in the way of our conquest of Shaka. But the precious deposits are located within his protected inner circle. The only way we could hope to claim his deposits was our own Evangelion project. And if we are to go into debt to create the special task force that will serve as our last hope, we will be racing against a timer where if our stockpiles deplete to 0 before we can take his, then the ensuing debuff and absentee fathers will render this game all but over. So we need to do this right and get all the robo upgrades we can from the tech tree. But like used bathwater, not all are created equal. And to find out which ones are worth forking over our life savings for a single sip, we have to research every other technology. And that starts by researching robotics to unlock GDRs and buy my second with gold. As my uranium deposits stay in the positives by the skin of their isotope, I move my 2 units to Cyrus's border in a scouting operation. The only problem they discover is other robots, so we lobby to set our nuclear stockpile to equal Portugal's in the World Congress. This ace in the hole must be saved for the most opportune moment, as we only have one to take out as many robots as possible. And even in a best case scenario, our monkey pilots will still have to engage in mecha action to come out victorious in this glorious struggle. And with the AI having researched every tech for over half the game at this point, we need to get our robots on the same playing field as the scientists have begun their discovery. The first major tech is advanced power cells, allowing our robots to bypass defenses and maximize the efficiency of their plasma beams in civilian areas, before going cybernetics to install Jordans for faster movement and 50-inch verticals, in conjunction with smart materials for a flat 10 combat strength. But the most important technology is the final one. Advanced AI, which nullifies his Air Force by spamming their pilots with ChatGPT prompts, forcing their pilots no choice but to eject or be mentally scarred for life, leaving only their robots as a threat. And I have a plan for that. We may be able to confiscate all of Cyrus's resources before his robots can make it back home, giving him the resource deficit and us more room for robots. And the entire reason that plan reveals itself to us is our discovering of his war in South America, and the bulk of his army trying not to get mosquito bites from the jungle. Capitalizing on this situation by securing our logistics for more move speed to get our third robot to the front line with enough uranium for all of 20 turns. 20 turns to kick down the whole rotten structure and secure the Baku uranium fields. I see no flaws in our plan. And finally, after assuring Cyrus I won't attack him, I name my units, as the invasion of Persia has begun. But there is still one advantage we can exercise: our military alliance with Christina. And while it was expensive to get her on board, that 5 combat strength is too huge to give up. Launching our first attack as we aim to cripple him before reinforcements can arrive. And our first goal in this operation is the city of Gordian and its 20 population, making it easy to keep if we want to continue west after that. But I was shocked to realize they had reinforcements on standby, despite their ongoing war with the Mayans. But even though our mechs were in a worse position than being stuck in a washing machine with your stepbrother on his way, they were strong enough to complete the first part of our objective in 2 turns, pushing the loyalty back to positive after Magnus was installed as governor. But as you know, the problem was never loyalty. It was robots, and after a few turns, he matched us in numbers with more incoming. And just as it was looking like this Barbarossa was about to turn into a Bagration, I realized he has a resource penalty. I spent this entire time carefully managing our forces for one simple reason. A 20 combat strength debuff is 2 eras behind and makes your unit obsolete. And here was Cyrus, running his robots with the energy supply of Germany after Putin got possessed by the ghost of Stalin. Coupled with our military alliance bonus, our fists achieved classification as both lethal and sexual weapons. And as they ran to fulfill their dire need of hemorrhoid cream, I finally utilized my secret weapon, wiping out multiple mechs. This annihilation of a specific group unlocks fascism, giving another 5 combat strength. That immediately proves useful, taking our second city in the same turn, establishing a base to build off of, which is why our golden age was so important, allowing us to move in on his uranium reserves without worrying about loyalty. But in my euphoria, I was about to make a critical mistake, one that could ruin my game for good. In my new city, I instinctively clicked on nuclear device, which would be fine in most circumstances. But when you spend 10 uranium, wiping out 5 turns from your operations time limit, you realize just how screwed we are. Unless we moved in on the uranium fast. And with our move speed, we were able to get there and do huge damage. For a single turn, my robots were the United States Armed Forces, and the Persian city was a Vietnamese rice farmer. But Cyrus has begun adapting, using their GDRs to bolster the city's defenses despite having no uranium. This expensive artillery piece increased the slog as time was running out. And with all the time in the world to eviscerate my army with a nuclear launch, or a whole new army popped out of his anus, we thankfully avoided that disastrous path, eliminating a GDR in the process. But with our uranium stocks restored, we had a problem. We have no uranium. Even with this city, the tile we needed was flooded. Without uranium, we weren't going to be able to continue, and with the huge debuff incoming, we were out of time. But thankfully, I was expecting this. You see, the reason I took these cities was not for its uranium deposits, but for its population. And unlike our population at home, possessing the same rights as 11th century housewives, this was for more than slave labor. And with our new uranium supply lines secured, it was time to take the Persian capital. But they weren't going home without a fight. putting up a formidable defense, but the 4th GDR we bought broke their spirits. As we massacred the now defenseless residents in accordance with the Geneva Suggestion Conventions, our victory was secured. But a certain leader who saw the writing on the wall wasn't just going to sit idly by and watch me gain enough power to challenge his throne. And he made his move to nip this problem in the bud, reducing our fighting strength while putting our nation right in the crosshairs of the world's superpower. Which brings me back to one of the hardest quotes of all time. If you come at the king, you best not miss. This change in events was not enough to save Cyrus's borders, cutting off access to Shaka like a Jewish foreskin, even if it meant we had to fight on 2 fronts. But before Shaka could mobilize, we would fix that problem with our new operation. And after another GDR, all 5 of our units move in on Susa, and with no units, no uranium, and most damning of all, no bitches, Cyrus lost his stronghold in a single turn. And after the utter destruction of his secondary island ring, now called Dresden, we forced the Persians to unconditionally surrender. But despite that war wrapping up, our main challenge was finally ready. It was now a one-on-one battle, Shaka vs. Civ Lifer. The reward? Victory of Civilization 6. But with time running out, a simple victory wouldn't suffice. To overtake him in score, this had to be an utter annihilation, and Shaka was going to make the first move, sending in his army of battleships to stop our robots. Now, one battleship is far weaker than a GDR, but thanks to 400 turns of buildup, multiply that number by 10 and you'll start to realize why that's a problem. Thankfully, my GDRs were still a cut above, and after culturally enriching his navy with twice the daily recommended dose of lead, all battleships were forced to retreat. But as I chased down the survivors, I would soon discover that they were leading me into a trap. But with him in a dark age, I knew he wouldn't be able to take his city back with loyalty when I captured it. So caution be damned, I'm launching this operation. I tried to get my Mayan allies, whose cities were suffering under the Zulu boot, but she refused, and soon enough I would discover why. With a massive army, large air force, and over 10 ranged attackers, I had to do something. After a nuclear response, dead would be a poor way to describe half his navy, while the rest of my damaged robots, in their moment of respite, needed a place to rest and repair. And so in a last-ditch move, we attempt to take the city and barely manage it. This was great. Not only was his city securely ours, but his cities were petitioning to free themselves from the tyrant Shaka, and with a base of operations, all we had to do was eliminate the second half of his navy, and we would be able to rest and recuperate. But to our horror, the bomber was shot down mid-flight, losing both the nuke and our only plane. I had to send in my robots on Coast Guard duty to secure our supply lines. But even in this perfect Zulu trap, with our boys surrounded, we still had complete control of the skies with aid from our fighter alongside my GDR's anti-air capabilities. And no matter how hard they tried to wrestle control back, we were shooting them down one by one. But even with the KDA of infinite to 1, they had over 400 turns of buildup, 400 turns of dominating the old world with their advanced military, 400 turns to throw at us with reckless abandon, and something was going to give. But with his GDRs nowhere in sight, we took our time, slowly chipping away at his navy until they were unfit for combat and forced to relieve the blockade. And now with all 5 of our robots focusing on one front, we began advancing once again. And after a 6th inclusion into our armed forces replenished our strength, the siege of the Zulu continent was about to reach its turning point. And as we moved forward, I pondered, and after a little pondering, I realized they have no uranium, and no GDRs. His Evangelion program stalling for over 400 turns was not only a blessing, but also an invitation to tear through his continent harder than Gorbachev did to Reagan's pussy. Eviscerating all his conventional forces, I grew confident in our success. Maybe a little too confident, as our greatest challenge was about to face us. Behind their initial cities was a mountain pass where our forces filtered through to another Zulu kill zone. They sent everything they had at us. Planes, rockets, machine guns, kids with machine guns, and with multiple robots on the brink, we barely managed to take the city. But with so low health, it would be useless if we lost a large portion of our army. I tried buying a nuke delivery device, but even then, their air force eliminated the threat in a single turn. And at this point, I was stuck. But despite our precarious position, we still had hope. If we could eliminate their 22 population city, the largest one still under Zulu control, then their loyalty meltdown would intensify. But with my forces on the brink, they sent everything at the robot that reached the gates. And despite a heroic last stand, this sacrifice was avenged next turn, and as their major cities were now feeling the strain of loyalty, with his entire empire crumbling right in front of him, it was time to press the advantage. We now had the initiative and used it to steamroll the rest of the Zulu colonial empire, overtaking them in score but not by an insurmountable amount. And with the Portuguese now in the lead, our work still wasn't over. But as I was making a move on the Zulu homeland, other civs have had enough. To be honest, I didn't even notice Persia until this very moment writing the script, so all my focus was on Sweden, and I would use the entire economic output of Shaka's empire to do it. With him now out of the race, I would have to queue up for duos once again, which would make Sweden easy enough to blitz. But with Lady Thick Thighs GDRs, if she takes the cities we need, we won't be able to catch up to Portugal. And so, midway through our invasion, we launch our third thermonuclear device, taking out 2 cities at once, and then a fourth for another 2 cities as we finally surpass the Portuguese, standing alone as the strongest civilization in the world. And with our now insurmountable advantage and 10 turns left, we force end to the end and arrive at the end, where for the very first time in civilization history, somebody has seen the score victory screen, and beat Civilization 6 after skipping 250 turns by conquering the world. Almost. If you want to see me actually conquer the TSL world, check out this video right here.